So we have a database ready. Now it's time to bring it into our entity data model. So here in Visual Studio, I have a simple console application. Let's create a new entity data model. So right click, add, new item, ADO.NET entity data model. I'm going to call this Pluto model and select EF Designer from database. Next, we need to specify the connection string. So, new connection. My server is SQL Express. You use whatever you have set up on your machine. And here's my Pluto database. Test the connection. Beautiful. Okay. Now here, I'm going to rename these from Pluto entities to Pluto DB context. And I will show you why in a second. Next. Now, because this is a brand new project and I have not installed Entity Framework yet, this wizard is asking me what version of Entity Framework I would like to install. If I manually installed Entity Framework using NuGet Package Manager, we wouldn't see this step in the wizard. So let's go ahead with Entity Framework 6. And for this exercise, I'm going to bring in the tables. I will cover stored procedures later in this section. Now, one checkbox I want you to pay attention to is pluralize or singularize generated object names. What is this? In my database, the tables have plural names. So we have courses, authors, tags. If we tick this checkbox, Entity Framework tries to apply English language rules to our entities and entity sets. So it will use a singular name for our entities, like author or course or tag. And for our DB sets, it uses plural names, like authors, courses. So I recommend to tick this at all times. I will cover the other two checkboxes later in this section. Now let's finish this. Okay, we got our model. Now I want to show you a few things you can do in this designer. First is zooming. So hold down the control and use the mouse wheel. That's better. You can also move entities around. Like this. Any way that makes sense to you. Or if it looks messy, right click on an empty area. Go to diagram and use layout diagram. Visual Studio will find a clean way to lay out your diagram. Like this. Another useful feature here is export as image. So right click here, diagram, export as image. You can also collapse all these entities like this. Or diagram, expand all. Here's another useful feature. So right click, scalar property format. Currently we've got display name. I'm going to change it to display name and type. And now look, each of these properties has its data type. If you think it's too noisy, back here, scalar property format, display name. Now take a look at this entity here. Course. It does not have an E at the end. Why is that? Remember that checkbox? Pluralize or singularize entities? So because our tables have plural names like courses, Entity Framework tries to singularize those names, but it's not always successful. Sometimes it fails. So in this case, it thought that to singularize courses, it needs to drop E and S at the end. So in case you find issues like that in your entities, the fix is really easy. So select the entity, right click, properties, and change the name here. Or you can also double click here and change it here. Now note that the diagram is changed and is indicated by this red icon here. Every time you make a change to this diagram and save it, Entity Framework regenerates your domain classes. So that's something you need to be really careful about, because if you go and make modifications to these names and you have existing code that references them, then once Entity Framework regenerates your domain classes, some of your existing code may break. Let's take a look at the generated code. So, Solution Explorer. Here's our Pluto model. Here are the domain classes. And let's take a look at the course. So note that it does have an E at the end. But if I go back to the diagram and change this name to a course without an E and save. Now back to Solution Explorer. Look, our class name is changed here. So it doesn't have the E. Okay, back here, let's quickly fix this. Now inside each entity, we have two sections: properties and navigation properties. A navigation property is a property that helps you navigate from one entity to another entity. So if I have a course object, I can access its author using the author property, which is linked to the author entity. Also note that Entity Framework supports all kinds of relationships. So here's a one-to-many relationship between author and course. And here's a many-to-many relationship between course and tag. Okay, that's pretty much all about working with this visual designer. In the next lecture, I'm going to show you what is under this visual designer. I'm going to uncover Entity Data Model. So I'll see you in the next lecture.